Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for our discussion today. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is a real possibility. I don't hear people talking about this, but there is a real possibility that we are getting to the point as humans, as people who are doing things to the point where we are getting the anger and wrath of God provoked for what we're doing. Now, what do I mean by that? You could point to all kinds of different things that humans are doing. You could point to all kinds of different activities, attitudes, sins, but one area in specific that I want to talk about today that's not being talked about a lot, and that is that human beings now have the capacity to actually play God. That's the phrase that's being tossed around. I reported a few weeks back about the review of the book by the author of Jennifer Doudna. It's about Jennifer Doudna, who created this CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool that allows human beings to go into the code of life, the DNA molecule, and actually edit out specific genes for different functions. For example, eye color. They can now go into a gene, the genetic code. They can edit out that genetic area and edit in something to change the color of a person's eye. Now, they can do this specifically in an embryo's development, because at that point, there aren't a lot of cells in that body, and they can edit out certain diseases. They think they might even be able to edit out the genes that control cancer and prevent cancer. They can put genes in that would be preventing cancer from occurring. They can edit out all kinds of diseases now that are killing people. And they're literally in the book, The Code Breakers, by Isaacson. The phrase playing God is actually something that's being tossed around by the scientists. They're asking the question, are we playing God? That's what the scientists are asking. Are we playing God? And nobody has denied that they are playing God. The only question now for the scientists is, let's just make sure that when we play God, that we're playing God in a safe way. That's basically, bottom line, what their discussion is. It's not whether they should play God. Almost all of the scientists say, yes, we should edit the gene. Yes, we should do what we're capable of doing now in the laboratory. We have this tool that we can do it. Let's play God, but let's play God in a safe way. So they're bypassing the actual question. The question in the minds of the scientists is not whether they should do this, it's how they should do it in a safe way. So they've already concluded, yes, they're capable of playing God in a safe way. But as Christians, we know that this is foolishness. We know the fallen nature of humanity. We know that original sin, the Adam and Eve sin passed on through generation to generation. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. The book of Romans talks about no one is righteous, no, not one. The book of Romans tells us. It talks about, David talks about in the Psalm, he says, in sin did my mother conceive me, meaning the original sin passed on from Adam and Eve, original parents, fallen in the garden. They disobeyed God. God said specifically, everything is available, everything is free to you, except one tree in the midst of the garden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Do not eat from this one tree. Everything else is permissible. Well, as you know, as you're familiar, Eve first and then Adam, tempted by the serpent, ate from the tree, disobeyed God, and were removed from the garden. So humanity does not live in a garden paradise anymore. Instead, we live in a very hostile environment. Nature is cruel. We have to guard against poison in nature. We have to guard against wild, ferocious animals. Uh, we nature is hostile to our life. We've seen that in the last few years, especially with the coronavirus, COVID-19. Nature is hostile. So this virus that's attacking people, and 500,000 plus people in the United States alone are dead because of the coronavirus, nature rebelling against us as humans. And so one of the things that we haven't thought about and what we haven't discussed is the fact that what are the consequences of playing God? Now, I mentioned before, I did videos before in the past about this CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool, the terrible, horrible possibilities that can occur when people start manipulating the very code of life, the DNA of the human genome, and you can get all kinds of things. But one of the things that I didn't mention in that video is that there has already been what is called, quote, synthetic life created in the laboratory. And this was done by Greg Venter about 10 or 11 years ago, where he actually wrote a DNA genetic code for an organism and then brought it about. So you have a totally unique, non-natural, unnatural genome, and this organism is able to reproduce. So this was the first, it was dubbed the first synthetic organism, synthetic living thing ever created. And this scientist and his lab and his team, Greg Venter, they were able to create this. This is a created organism. This is not a natural organism. No natural process went into creating this organism. You think of all of the natural organisms, you think of all of the known species of things. Scientists over the years have collected and categorized species and subspecies and phylas and different classification levels of all of life on the planet Earth. There are classifications of birds, classification of mammals, classifications of reptiles, classification of fish, all kinds of classifications, and each one has its own name because it's different in many different aspects. This organism is a new organism. It is not a natural organism. It was created by a scientist and his team in a laboratory, and they wrote the genetic code. It's a very slimmed down, very simple, probably the simplest genetic code ever found on the planet Earth. They brought it as far as simple as they could figure out, and it is a very simple DNA molecule. And it was man-made. It was synthetic. It's the first synthetic creature. Now, that is another thing that has occurred only in the last decade or so. And then the gene editing tool is even newer than that. And that occurred only 5 or 6 years ago. So all of these things are happening all at once. And what that means is that now human beings have the capacity literally create these mythical creatures that people have always been talking about in the fairy tales and the folklore of the different cultures. For example, the unicorn. The unicorn, there has never been a unicorn ever found. There's never been the bones of the fossils of a unicorn ever found. It's a mythical creature. It was created in the mind of man, some poetic legend story of a mythical creature called a unicorn. It's the stuff of fairy tales. But now, because of men playing God with the DNA the basic code of life, the genetic code of life, it is possible and probably will come about fairly soon that someone will come up with the code, the DNA code for creating a horse with a tusk coming out, a horn coming out of its forehead. There's no reason why it couldn't be. Now, in nature, it is not, but since we now know the code of life, we know the DNA, and we can edit the DNA, we can come up with a way to put a horn right on the forehead of a horse. And this could be the beginning of creating an entire mythical creature called a unicorn. And this, in fact, this was asked by Isaacson in his book, The Code Breakers. Could we possibly come up with a unicorn? And the scientists and the geneticists said, yes, it's within the realm of possibilities now. So if you're going to play God, if you're willing to mess with the very code of life, the DNA and genetic code, you can do all kinds of things. That's the danger, though, because we could create some kind of accidental monster or virus that could actually wipe out all of humankind and everything that's living. We could create a doomsday monster. We could do anything. Evil scientists could do whatever evil scientists want to do. And that's why the so-called lab leak hypothesis, where the coronavirus, COVID-19, actually was manufactured and created in a lab, is a very real possibility. We have everything that's needed to do that already, and it's already been around for years, a number of years. Not a long time, but 5 or 6 years with the gene editing. So all of that is possible, and we just have to find out whether that, in fact, actually took place. And we don't know yet. We don't have 100% evidence that that actually took place, but it's within the realm of possibilities. Another scary thing is possible in this whole field is that, for example, there is a mythical creature called the centaur, and that is the body of a horse, the head of a man. And you've seen that in like the Greek mythology, and I think the Roman mythology. You've seen stories of the centaurs, and you've seen cartoons of the centaurs, and you've seen movies. They've had movies of the mythical creatures, the centaurs, where you have the man's head on a horse's body. Now, until today, that was something that was impossible because there was no way that you could breed a horse to have a human head. And there's no way you could breed a human to have a horse body because that was impossible until today. But right now, because of the gene editing tool capability, remember, the code of life is in the DNA. So if you have the right proteins turned on and you have the wrong proteins turned off, you can create a mythical creature like a unicorn, or you can create a mythical creature like a centaur. You could actually have a human rational head of a man on the body of a horse. And that's, for example, in the movie The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You had C.S. Lewis's fantasy novels. There was a centaur, and that was always and everywhere understood as a mythical creature made up in the mind of a man. But nowadays, because we are playing God, we are actually to the point we're playing God, we can create whatever, pretty much whatever we want to create just by manipulating and turning on proteins and coding in the DNA. We can create these things now. We could create a cyclops, a one-eyed, huge creature. You would simply take a huge ape-like creature and turn on all of the genes that would create a massively huge ape-like creature, and then you would manipulate the DNA so that there would be one eye instead of two eyes, and you would have your Cyclops. Again, a mythical creature, but because of the technology and because scientists have the ability now to play God in the literal sense of creating life. We've already seen that with the Greg Venter synthetic life. He created a manufactured artificial life, synthetic life form, organism. We've seen that. And scientists' willingness to do whatever their curiosity leads them to do. That's the problem. That's the problem. It's a human problem. Now, if you had Jesus Christ and you had the angels who were in charge of these powerful tools like CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool, and if you had the angels or Jesus Christ, you would not have to worry about playing God, because they would realize that, hey, this is something that is not within my authorization. This is not within my classification. I am not capable of, nor am I able to handle this power with responsibility. And so the angels would not do this, and neither would Jesus Christ, the Son of God, on earth. He would be able to, and he would be capable of doing this because of his perfection, but he would be the only one that would be capable of doing it because he is the only perfect being. Now, if we had human beings who were not sinful and fallen, yes, they could only do what is good with these new tools and omit anything that's bad. We could trust them because they weren't fallen, and things would be great because we would only reap the benefits and not suffer through any of the curses that come about through this technology. Well, as you all know, that's a fantasy world. We are in a fallen world. We live among sinners. Scientists are not excluded. They are sinners just like everyone else. They have egos. They have power trips. They want recognition. They want glory. They want to be the first to do something. That's what we saw with the scientist in China when he edited the embryo cells of the baby and planted it into the womb of a Chinese woman who gave birth, and she gave birth to the first child who was born with their genes edited. That's what that scientist did. Now, he was a rogue scientist. The other scientists in the world chastise him. The Chinese government, I think, is locking him up for a few years. But because these things are possible, unfortunately, now they're going to actually happen. And the scientists are not capable of regulating their own kind. We just saw that right away. Just years after the invention of this CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool, it was used in a manner that was considered by most of these scientists immoral. Of course, that word immoral keeps changing because in their minds, immoral just means we're not there yet. And so they are not locked. They are not fixed to any absolute moral standards. Like as Christians, we are committed to the Bible's teachings on morality and ethics. The scientists who are doing these experiments, they are not committed to them, especially the Chinese and communists and atheistic secularists. They're not committed to anything other than just whatever happens to be their favorite ethical system or whatever happens to be best for their country at the time. They'll do anything and experiment with anything that they think is right for them right now. So it's all relativism for these people. There's another development. If it's not enough that there was already synthetic, man-made, artificial life created in the laboratory by Greg Venter, and if it's not enough now that Jennifer Doudna has then invented, along with some other scientists, this CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool that can actually rearrange the DNA molecules. If that's not enough, we just heard from PBS the other day that scientists have taken monkey DNA and human DNA and mix them together and interchanged parts inside of the DNA molecule. Again, if you look at that and you say, why are you playing God? You're taking a species of primate, monkeys, and you're mixing it with human DNA, and you're just experimenting with these things. Now, they're saying, well, the benefits of this experimentation could be great because we can find out a lot of things, and we might be able to cure some diseases. We might be doing good things that will help people and alleviate suffering and all of the positive, good aspects of it. And that's what the scientists continually tell us. It's going to really be good for the human race. It's really going to be good for people. It's going to take away pain. It's going to take away suffering. It's going to cure diseases. They're touting all of the benefits of this, but they're not at the same time explaining the dangers of this and what could be the curses of this and the bad consequences of these things. Now, this experimentation with monkey and human DNA, they didn't allow the embryos to grow. They didn't allow it to develop. It wasn't implanted in the womb of a woman. But you can imagine some rogue scientists, and they're all out there. We saw that with the Cas9 situation where the rogue Chinese scientists in a laboratory, because this technology, another problem is this technology is relatively simple to do. There are kits that you can order off eBay that will help you do this. That's what's major difference between this kind of playing God and the nuclear energy bomb-making playing of God. Now, when that occurred over 50 some years ago, that ended World War II, people were saying this is a terrible thing because this is playing God. And it is, because you're unleashing the power of the nucleus of an atom. And it is a godlike power. I mean, the ability with one bomb to blow up an entire city, that is a godlike power. And now we have megatons of explosive power with these nuclear bombs that could be dropped or flown anywhere in the world and dropped. So yeah, we're playing God with that, but now we have the capacity to do something potentially even more powerful than that, and it's so simple and it's easy and it's low cost. And so with this CRISPR-Cas9 technology, you could have people editing genes in their garage or in their basement. It's really that simple. And so what would stop a rogue scientist from mixing the monkey and the human DNA, implanting it in a woman's womb, and then giving birth to part monkey, part human? What would stop that? Only ethical considerations on the part of the scientists, and we know that they cannot be trusted. So this kind of stuff is coming at us quickly. We're already seeing this stuff happening, and the scientists are saying, well, we have to get together and make rules and protocols, and we have to have nations enforce laws and everything. Yeah, that's great, and that has to take place, but we all know that in the laboratories around the world, there are scientists who are going to disregard all of your rules, and they're going to break the laws of their nations. It's going to happen, and we are going to see the results of what happens when humans begin to play God. Now, what is the meaning of COVID-19 and this worldwide epidemic that has basically crippled the world economies, disrupted the entire planet? Is this God and his wrath and his judgment telling human beings, look, you have the knowledge now, you have discovered the ability to edit DNA. You've figured out the code of life. You have cracked the code of life, and now you can manipulate it in any way you want. But I am not happy with you doing so. In fact, God might very well be angry. Now, some people today, they don't think of God as an angry God. They don't think of God as getting mad. They don't think of God as having wrath. They don't think of God as judging sin. Well, let me tell you, those people are not dealing with the God of the Bible, because the God of the Bible, both Old and New Testament, some people say, well, God was angry and mean and judgmental and wrathful only in the Old Testament. Well, read the book of Revelation. Book of Revelation describes the same God of the Old Testament brought into the future. And at the end of times, he is going to exercise his wrath and judgment upon sinful humanity for their disobedience and rebellion against his rule. They were unwilling to submit to God's authority. Well, it's the same way with scientists and citizens today who are unwilling to submit to God's authority and violating his will. And it is not the will of God for man to tinker around with the code of life. It is not the will of God for humanity to play God, to take upon these powers which it cannot handle. Like I said before, if we were angels, if we were Jesus Christ, we could handle these powerful tools that we have in editing genes and creating life in the test tube and doing all of these experiments, because we would be trustworthy to only do the good things. We would be trustworthy to only conduct our research and experiments for the good. But as we all know, because of the fallen nature of human beings, we are not trustworthy. We cannot trust the scientists. We cannot trust the politicians. We cannot trust these protocols that are developed by these scientific organizations. They're not even worth the paper that it's cost to print them on. And so we are headed for a very dark, dark future, possibly even something like what we see, for example, in the movie The Blade Runner with Harrison Ford, the old, I think it was the 70s or 80s movie, where you have all this genetic engineering taking place, manufacturing of genetic creatures. That is a dark future for humanity. Unfortunately, it's already here. We're already seeing it happen. We're only going to see it happen more and more and more in the future. So we need to really pray. We need to ask God to intervene, to stop this kind of manipulation of the code of life, to stop this mad rush to what will essentially be a curse, even though under the guise of a blessing, it'll say, well, it'll save so many lives and alleviate pain and cure diseases and all the good things. But what'll happen is, because human beings are fallen, they will abuse it. They will rush. They will do shoddy work. They will create more of a problem than they will solve solutions. And we will do this because we are fallen. So we need to pray that God in his mercy spares us from the nightmare scenario that is very possible. And God, and even the fact that Jesus will return, we pray that he comes quickly before all of this pans out. Well, discouraging, but real. We'll see you back next week on another edition of the program. God bless.